Hello, everyone. My name is Johanna Wald. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute. I'm really very pleased and honored to be here today, and I want to thank Judge Donald for her incredible leadership. We've had a couple of chances to present together, and I've just been thrilled to work with Judge Donald, and I'm very honored to be on this panel with some incredibly accomplished professionals. So just to sort of start a little bit, I just want to give you a tiny bit of background about kind of how I came into the work of implicit bias. Before I worked at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, I worked at the Civil Rights Project. We were doing a lot of work looking at racial disparities in school discipline, what's come to be known as the school-to-prison pipeline. And in that work, we noticed that there was an attempt and a lot of work done to kind of replace zero tolerance with other programs such as positive behavioral incentive systems and a number of other sort of graduated sanctions that made it, that would make suspensions, which we knew to be very damaging to students, less frequent. And some of the initial research that came out of that was, while these sort of programs were actually successful in reducing the overall numbers of suspensions, these racial disparities, which were so huge, remained really large. And so there was a problem. The overall numbers were going down, but we were still seeing these very large racial disparities, and we were seeing them in these kind of subjective categories, such as disruption of a school assembly, insubordination, these kind of categories that led a lot of room for discretion and judgment and interpretation. And that became a very, very difficult issue to kind of address and really get at. You know, how do you really get at that? When I started to become very familiar with the research around implicit bias, to me it was one of those aha moments. I was like, okay, this body of research offers really an opportunity and an avenue to look at this in a different way and maybe to provide a piece to the puzzle of what is going on in schools that continue to make these racial disparities so large among individuals, teachers who are clearly very well-intentioned and obviously not, quote, racist. So this was very exciting for me, and we started to really delve into the research and sort of develop, looking at kind of which research might sort of offer some clues. And then so much has happened in the past couple of years, as you all know, that it seems as if kind of every day we're confronted with a situation where, we've seen the research that kind of explains what may be going on. And so as we've sort of adapted this presentation, we've tried to adjust and keep up to date and kind of add as we learn more and more. So what you're going to get is a pretty idiosyncratic kind of overall framework for implicit bias, very much filtered through my own, through some of the research that I particularly find compelling. So I'm trying to kind of provide you with an overall framework, and at the same time, please understand that this is very much interpreted through my lens. What is implicit bias or social cognition? Implicit social cognition, you've also heard the term unconscious bias, implicit bias, is the process by which the brain uses these mental associations that are so well established as to operate without awareness, without intention, and without control. And that definition comes from Project Implicit at Harvard University, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later on. But essentially, it's sort of an association between concepts or ideas or notions that are so close, that are so tightly associated, that as soon as kind of one is triggered, so is the other, and there's no conscious awareness of this. It happens so quickly that the two are just joined. And I just, in a very simple terms, I don't know if any of you have certain associations with music or smells, that as soon as, for instance, you hear a song, it evokes a time period in your life, a place where you were, a mood that you had, one beat, and you're back wherever you were, and there's just a whole kind of array of moods and and thoughts and feelings that are associated with that song, and you have absolutely no control over that. That just sort of happens. That's a kind of very simple explanation for some of these just very automatic associations. So here's just a very quick example. What color is sky?
Respond.
I'm just asking you, when you see sky, what color is that? Are the letters written in? Okay, grass. Dirt. Sunshine. Stop sign. Okay, so that was pretty quick, right? Okay, now, hopefully this is going to work. Think of what is the color of the letters? And say them out loud. Okay, so.
Some of you are not participating. I can hear that.
But I think in the second time, some of you may not be participating because it's confusing, right? I mean, the first time you see what you expected. You saw a red stop sign, you saw a blue sky, you saw green grass. It's very easy. And you saw there was a certain sort of, everybody was saying it together. The second time, it's very confusing because you're not seeing what you're expecting to see. And you have to stop, you have to think, you have to say, wait a second. And there's this sort of dissonance that happens. Here's something called the McGurk effect, which some of you may have seen before, but hopefully we're going to try this. Could we get that louder? Can you guys hear that?
What do you hear?
Ba, 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 ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, 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 ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B.
Ba, ba, ba.
It's an illusion known as the McGurk effect.
So, did it change for you? I mean, what I find so amazing about this is when you see the lips say fa, you literally hear it. It changes what you hear. And that's just an example of how the way in which our expectations, our associations, actually can change the way we see and hear things, so that what we think we're seeing as the truth may be somewhat filtered by our own automatic associations. Okay, so an explosion of research about implicit bias and its relationships to our decisions and actions has been published in the past decade. It's actually been published in the past several decades. And this research offers us new avenues and opportunities to intervene to reduce the effects of bias in our institutions and our interactions. Now, what I'm going to give you in the next sort of couple of slides are some examples of some of that research that I find particularly compelling, but I want to make sure you understand that the body is huge and getting bigger every single day, and you're only going to get kind of my greatest hits. But there is the volume is quite considerable. All right, negative implicit attitudes. There's something called the implicit association test, which I don't know, have any of you taken that, or do any of you know what that is? Okay. So it is a test that you can go online. You can go to Project Implicit. You can, and you have to sort of take 10, it's completely confidential. You have to take about 10 or 15 minutes and sort of unplug because you can't be distracted. And it tests some of your automatic associations. It tests the speed with which you make automatic associations between a set of images and sometimes people with notions and ideas. And there's a number of different sort of implicit associations that you can test. Race is one of them, and it's what I'm going to be focusing on in this presentation, but race is not the only sort of implicit bias. There's age, there's gender, there's disability status, there's any number of sort of automatic associations and some implicit biases that we hold. But what this test does is it gives you an opportunity to very privately sort of test yourself against some of these implicit associations. This has been online for, I want to say, probably 10 years? Yeah, maybe even longer. So thousands and thousands of people have done this test. Researchers who employ it have found that, in fact, the majority of tested Americans harbor negative implicit attitudes and stereotypes toward dark-skinned people. Now, 80% of whites who take this test and 40% of African Americans who take this test actually register some level of automatic preference for light-skinned people. And that is a difficult thing for some people to really kind of grasp and accept. But that is what the test shows. So evidence from hundreds of studies done by two of the leading researchers in this area, Jerry Kang and Mazarin Banaji, have found this. The magnitude of implicit bias toward members of outgroups is large. This is not an American phenomenon at all. This is an international, it's a human phenomenon. Automatic associations are a way for us to make sense of the world. But when we use them in terms of social constructs and about individuals, that is where we can see some deep harm happening, but that the magnitude is large and it is universal. And I think the next two are really important. Implicit bias often conflicts with our conscious attitudes and intentional behaviors. So as complicated human beings, we are able to hold contradictory kind of ideas and notions and values at the same time. So many of us can really believe ourselves to be absolutely free of bias. This can be something that's really important. It's the way we were raised. It's something that we believe. It's an important value in ourselves. And at the same time, we can hold these unconscious biases. And increasingly, the research is showing that implicit bias, especially when it's unaddressed and unacknowledged, actually influences our behavior toward those who are the subject of the bias at least as much and possibly more than our explicit values. So that's why it's so important that we kind of that we start to look at this research and figure out ways we might be able to intervene. Because, in fact, when it's unacknowledged, it's the implicit bias that often is what's triggering our actions and our judgments. And when we're in positions to make decisions and actions that change people's lives, that deeply affect people's lives, this can have an enormous effect. Okay, so an inconvenient truth, as the authors wrote, as disturbing as this evidence is, there's too much of it to be ignored. Just a quick sort of summary about implicit versus explicit. They're related, but they're different mental constructs. Neither one is viewed as solely accurate or authentic, but increasingly the evidence is that implicit biases, as measured by the IAT, do predict our behaviors in the real world. So 3 things to remember about implicit bias. We all have biases. It's a way for us to process and organize information. John Powell, who's a leading expert in this area, says, bias doesn't make you prejudiced, it makes you human. Our unconscious biases are often in conflict with our egalitarian value systems and our beliefs, and yet implicit bias predicts and determines our actions and decisions, possibly more than our explicit values. So now I'm going to move into some of the research about this. First of all, in the U.S., 1 inch of height is worth about $800 per year in salary. Something to keep in mind. Think about the last time, think about most of our presidents have been tall, right? I think the last time, it may be John Kerry and George W. Bush was the last time that the tallest candidate didn't win. But in general, immigrants with lightest complexion earn about 8 to 15% more than those with dark skin. So, which makes being 1 shade lighter about the same effect as having an additional year of education. Here's a really interesting study, Racialized Perspective on Writing Skills. 60 lawyers received the exact same research memo written by a theoretical third-year law student. Half of the lawyers were told that the law student was white, and the other half were told that that the law student was African American. The exact same memo averaged 3.2 over 5, rating under our hypothetical African American, and 4.1 over 5 under our hypothetical white student. The qualitative comments were also consistently different. The exact same memo. Misremembering facts. Justin Levinson did a study looking at prospective jurors. They were given a fictional incident. He used names as proxy for race. He gave some of the prospective jurors the name William, some of them Tyrone. The facts of the incident were exactly the same. And yet, participants more frequently remembered the aggressive details when they thought that the defendant was Tyrone rather than William. And what Levinson concluded was that the race of a civil plaintiff or a criminal defendant can actually implicitly cause people to misremember facts in a racially biased way. Jennifer Eberhard, who has won a MacArthur Genius Award, has done amazing work in this area. She has found that police officers who are exposed to a group of black faces or a group of white faces and asked who looks criminal, has found that police officers not only view the black faces as more criminal, but also as the more, quote, stereotypically black, the police officers rated them the most criminal of all. The super predator script, a mere 5-second exposure to a mugshot of an African American and Hispanic youth actually raises a level of fear among viewers, increases their support for Get Tough policies, and promotes racial stereotyping. This one was done back in the 90s, and Jennifer Eberhard did a very similar study just a couple of years ago with very similar results. I think what's important to remember here is it not just raises the level of fears, but it then increases support for Get Tough policies. This is sort of a study that kind of breaks my heart because Philip Goff, who is also really well known in this area, and he's done a lot of work with police forces. What he found is that black boys as young as 10 years old are likely to be mistaken as older and perceived as guilty and face police violence. They're often viewed as responsible for their actions at an age when white boys still benefit from the assumption that children are essentially innocent. And I remember, if you remember, when Tamir Rice was shot by the police officer and he was 12 years old and the police officer said, "I thought he was 20." What Philip Goff then said was, "We rarely see our black children with the same basic human privilege of getting to act like children. He was a boy in a man's body," was something that I heard multiple times. Jennifer Eberhard has also done research where she links this sort of ape-human connection, and particularly in terms of African Americans and the sort of ape imagery and what that means. What she did find in one of her studies is that when primed with a picture of an ape, participants were more like, and they were given, they saw a video of police beating up someone, and some of them saw a white person, and some of them saw a black person. The video itself you couldn't really see. What she found was those who had been primed with these pictures of apes actually were more likely to believe that the suspect deserved the beating. And she saw this as sort of a less than human. It's sort of a dehumanizing effect. When we see people as less than human, we're more willing to sort of take very harsh or tough penalties toward those individuals. This is a really interesting one. Mazrin Banaji, who's written a book called The Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People, has suggested that today maybe prejudice proceeds from whom we choose to help as much as whom we exclude. Who do we include as well as who do we exclude? It's a really interesting way, I think, to think about this. Who are we letting in? Who are we giving the benefit of the doubt to? There's a bus study, and this really rings home to me because I take the commuter rail every day. And what the study did was people came on the bus and they didn't have a bus ticket. They said they forgot it, they left it at home, whatever. And the study was sort of who did the bus drivers kind of say let through, and who did the bus drivers stop and not allow on the bus. And it's probably no great surprise that this wasn't done in the United States, this was done in Australia, but whites were more likely to be able to the bus driver was more likely to kind of let them on. And what they said was discriminatory gifts are more likely than discriminatory denials. It's a really interesting way to think about implicit bias. All right, can we use this research to kind of intervene, to reduce the consequences? There is some good news here. There's evidence that implicit biases are malleable. They are not set in stone. We can change them. There's a type of person that one of the researchers has called chronic egalitarians. Those are people who really consider themselves to be free of bias, and it's an important part of who they are. As soon as they learn about implicit bias, as soon as they kind of take the implicit bias test and perhaps score as if and learn that they have some preference for light-skinned people, this is upsetting to them. They want to change, and they start to actually self-monitor. And a lot of those folks just kind of can start to kind of monitor themselves and start to actually change the way they think about things, the way they react. And in doing that, they actually start to reduce their biases. So there is good news that there are interventions. This is kind of a big new field. My fellow panelists are going to talk about some of the ways in which they do that. It's remarkable work. I think it's really exciting work. Patricia Devine is a leading scholar in this area. She's a social psychologist at the University of Wisconsin, and she has provided, as far as I know, and you may be able to tell me otherwise, that there have been other studies, but she actually worked with psychology students over a period of 6 weeks. She gave them the implicit association test. She gave them a workshop on implicit bias. She gave them 5 strategies to work on. She said, work on these, do at least, use these at least twice a week. She tested them again after 3 weeks and again after 6 weeks, and she actually found that sustained, if people actually did kind of practice these strategies, that there was a sustained reduction in the levels of implicit bias that they registered, and that reduction lasted over time. So that's kind of exciting news. What she says is, in order to de-bias, what are the preconditions? One, you need to acknowledge that you have biases. You can't deny it. You have to be motivated to change. You have to pay attention to when stereotypical responses or assumptions are activated, and you need time to practice new strategies. Okay, so I will take it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.